Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our H&K Creativity Plus Wellness Symposium on such a beautiful afternoon. I'm Simon Whitehead. I'm the CEO of Hill & Knowlton here in the UK. This is the first of our virtual sessions for Creativity Plus, and I really hope that you get some inspiration from this afternoon. I want to thank our guest speaker and all other speakers and people who have put such a huge amount of effort into this. But in order to introduce them, I'd like to introduce you to Claire Holden, our Chief Innovation Officer, who will moderate the symposium today. Claire, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you to everyone for joining us. For those that don't know, Creativity Plus is our annual event which shines a spotlight on creativity and key trends within it. We actually made a decision to break it down into a series of different smaller events, focusing in on different sectors and different topics. Wellness was always going to be the first of our events, but gosh, no one could have predicted quite how relevant it would end up being. COVID has had and continues to have a devastating, far-reaching impact across the world. It's changed everything and has affected everyone, albeit to different degrees. But today we want to focus in and look at the impact that it's had on creativity and communications within the wellness space, which feels even more pertinent as we're in Mental Health Awareness Week. I'm delighted to say that to help us kind of look at this topic, we're joined by three great speakers. We have Stefan Pretorius, Chief Technology Officer from WPP, Jess Walsh, the head of our healthcare team, and then Dan Berry, who leads our behavioural science offer at H&K London. So today we have an hour together. The agenda is split up into three main sections. Firstly, we're going to have Stefan, who's going to talk through how the pandemic has affected lives and work, and importantly, I guess, technology's role within that. Jess and Dan are then going to talk together about what communications really needs today. And at the end, the final section will be a Q&A where we're going to answer as many questions as we have time for. So just to reiterate, the Q&A is going to be held to the end. And I'll come on to actually explain how you can all get involved in that. But please do kind of think about and note your questions as we go through the agenda today. Also worth saying, we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on social. So please do engage with us. We have our handles and the hashtag on the screen now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stefan.
Thank you very much, Claire. Confirming everyone can hear me. Great. So today I would like to talk to you about just some thoughts about what COVID-19 is teaching us about work, life, and what really matters. And this is it's very much a kind of a personal set of reflections, but clearly I've tried to weave in themes from our experience at WPP, my personal experience, and really, the way that this whole big slowdown has impacted the way we think about the world we live in. So I'd like to start with this idea that Joseph Schumpeter coined in the 40s around creative distraction. And this is really an idea about how capitalism works and how there's sort of constant cycles of new entrants and destruction of old models in capitalist societies. But really the point that I want to emphasize here today is this idea that creative destruction always accelerates in a crisis. And so what that means is that the things that were going really well before the crisis seem to accelerate and get adopted faster. And the things that were already on decline or challenged seem to fall apart and lose much faster. And so, what that for me as a technologist and working in WPP as a creative transformation company means is that we have an enormous opportunity to reinvent how we think about work, life, and everything else in this crisis. And so one can either get depressed about it, and I think many of us struggle with the boredom of isolation and a lot of the other insecurities that come along with it. But it really should be seen as an opportunity for reinvention and innovation. And I think I'm incredibly encouraged by the response to the scientific, to the crisis by the scientific community. The graph on the top left shows you the number of peer-reviewed medical papers shared around COVID compared this time around compared to H1N1 and SARS before that. You'll see an incredibly rich data visualization database or dashboard that we've created around risk, readiness, and recovery. And we've even in our WPP data catalog amassed an enormous amount of data around COVID for research and commercial modeling. And so this idea that creative innovators are using technology and data to rise above the virus is really quite encouraging. That is my cat, unless you thought it was something else. And I have not the ability to get rid of her right now, so excuse the backdrop. But moving on slightly from this idea of COVID response, I think what's really interesting is the way we've all adopted to work. And I see this very much as this idea of distributed collaboration. So, we've all had to start working through Teams and Zoom and other video conference mechanisms. But we've also had to learn new ways to collaborate and to really kind of think about our contribution to teams and what our value in an organization is in a way that's maybe, quite out of the ordinary. And again, thinking very much in an optimistic way about this, I've seen incredibly interesting modalities, like, for instance, moving physical workshop techniques to digital ones. So here on the left, you see the sort of normal people standing around putting sticky notes on a board, collaborating around a workshop. And on the right hand side is a Miro board, with video links and assets and videos and sort of roadmaps and all kinds of project plans. And really, my observation is that digital collaboration or platform-based collaboration is actually far more effective and leads to better quality outcomes than the physical environments have in the past. I also think that collaborating with your colleagues, remotely can actually be quite a lot of fun. Here's my team singing happy birthday to one of our project managers last week. For the record, Teams does not synchronize voices, so it's impossible to do anything collectively. But a bit more seriously, I think we've also learned to solve more complex business workflows. So, on this screen is sort of a fairly complex diagram of how a production, workflow works and all the different connections and stakeholders in order to get that done. And what we've seen is that emerging platforms for collaboration and production collaboration that we were beginning to use before the crisis have now really begun to take off. And so platforms like Frame.io allow us now to effectively distribute the roles of doing a piece of content production. No longer do you have to get the entire agency and all the clients and all the crew to fly down to Cape Town for an elaborate photo shoot. You can effectively distribute the roles and get people to collaborate on the same content, sitting in different locations, often in different countries, both synchronously and asynchronously. So all of this is great, and I think a lot of it will stick in the sense that we will do more of this kind of work. We will think differently about optimizing work, and I think a lot of this will become part of that terrible phrase, the new normal. But sort of on a more personal level, I think a lot of this isolation has led people to do a lot of self-assessment, and self-assessment takes many different forms. There's the sort of the fitness self-assessment, which is all about, am I healthy? Am I going out for my run every day? Let me use lockdown to get in shape. I mean, personally, I find it all a bit sort of, fascist and overbearing, all these sort of energetic people telling you to exercise every day when, you could hardly do it twice a week before. But anyway, that's sort of one way that people are responding to lockdown. And they're using technology in many cases to log into classes and to connect with personal trainers and the like. There's obviously also a big focus on mental healthness. And again, here people are using, applications and digital platforms to connect with others, to practice together, to be guided through meditation sessions, etc. And I think it's quite an interesting counterweight, as people's need for mental health and stability is exacerbated under lockdown, that people have turned to these platforms en masse. There's also obviously health assessment, and this is a particularly great example of an Australian business called ResApp. It's a Bill and Melinda Gates funded technology platform that allows you to essentially cough into a mobile phone, and the sound of the cough then is used to diagnose different kinds of respiratory health and exacerbation of conditions. And while things like this can't detect COVID, at least what it can do is to triage and create some kind of sense of risk across a population. And even things that were obviously in place long before COVID, this idea of having more continuous tracking, self-assessment through digital platforms that not only gives the individual more control over their own health, but also allows them to connect with their doctors and to be in an ongoing conversation in terms of treating chronic conditions and exacerbation. And lastly, sort of quite lo-fi. This is an image of the actual Imperial College tracking kit that was dropped through my mailbox a couple of weeks ago. My wife and I and our children all developed symptoms, and they sent us this kit to do essentially a home antibody test for COVID. And completely lo-fi, no technology involved, but the doctor who wanted to monitor us conducting the test did set up a Zoom call to step us through the process. So this is all sort of happening, and I think we are incredibly lucky, during this period of lockdown to have had all these platforms and technologies to help us and to guide us through the period. But I think switching gears again a little bit, I think what is really interesting is the sort of personal realizations that people come to, and for me specifically, they're the sort of central idea of how connected we are to other people and how everything is actually connected, ourselves to animals to nature, has really kind of become a big theme for me intellectually. It was also brought home when at the beginning of the period, we went up to the Lake District for a weekend, and then Johnson announced the lockdown, and we ended up staying outside of Staveley in a rented house for a month in the Lake District. Now, the Lake District in spring without tourists is an absolutely wonderful thing, but this experience of going for walks, through the countryside and literally seeing only sheep and stacked walls was an incredibly enriching experience and a reminder of how connected we are to nature and how necessary connection to nature is for people to feel complete and healthy. And that sort of train of thought, also reminded me of a interaction I had nearly 20 years ago with a pioneer of the modern internet, a gentleman called John Perry Barlow, sadly passed away now. John Perry Barlow was a sort of a multi-talented individual. He was a songwriter for the Grateful Dead, but he was also one of the early thinkers, along with people like Esther Dyson, who's on the left there, of thinking about the protocols and the philosophy of what the internet should be. And I think this photograph with Bill Gates is also quite relevant given the importance of Gates in responding to the current crisis. But the central idea that John Perry Barlow advanced was this idea of evil is that which separates. And I think, if nothing else, this period of lockdown, this period of separation, has reminded me of that idea. And like many of us, through this period of isolation, I did step up my training a little bit, and to monitor my performance, I bought a new iWatch, which I thought would be a sort of a nice way of keeping track of things. But one of the nicest things that I found in this new iWatch is a messaging feature, the 2-finger hold on the messenger feature, that allows you to record haptically your heartbeat and send it to a friend or a family member who has an iWatch, so that they can feel your heartbeat haptically on their arm. And I thought this is one of the most beautiful illustrations of using technology to connect people with each other, and also a very poignant reminder during this time of separation of the importance of human connection, human touch, and socializing with other people. So with all of that, I want to end my talk with a beautiful film that Grade recently produced for Emergency, a GSK brand. It's called A Love Letter to Normal Life.
Come with me, my love. Come with me, my love, to the sea of love. I want to tell you how much.
Often the video is taking longer to cache than it did earlier.
Come with me, my love, to the sea of love. I want to tell you how much I love you. Do you remember when we met? That day I knew you were my pet. I want to tell you how much I love you.
Right, I think we've seen the video a couple of times now. Sorry about that, slight technical glitch. I guess getting used to doing these by this mean. Stefan, was that the end of your talk?
That was indeed, that was the end of my talk. Handing back to Claire.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. Yeah, thanks so much for that. It feels so important, I guess, to take a small amount of time to reflect on the speed of innovation and that evolution that we're seeing during this chapter. And I guess reflect on some of the learnings that we can take that could have a positive impact on our future. And also to say thank you so much for the Apple Watch tip. I love the idea of being able to send that physical touch to someone that I'm separated from. So now I'm going to pass the virtual floor over to Jess and Dan. So guys, is creativity doing enough for human health?
Thank you very much, Claire, for the provocative question to start us off. And thank you to everyone who is joining us from home today, and to Stefan for that really gorgeous foundation from which to jump off of. If you haven't seen the video he closed with, it's Love Letter to Normal Life by GSK's Emergency, and it really is a gorgeous piece of content to remind us of our connection to one another at this time. So is creativity doing enough for human health? A huge question, and my very first thought when I have been thinking about this is that in most of our lifetimes, I don't think we've ever asked creativity to do so much. If you think about it, the scientists who are developing treatment and cure, the frontline workers, alongside that, communications, creativity, the data that Stefan mentioned, that's what we have to craft the messaging that is asking the global population to change their lives overnight, the way they live, the way they work, love, learn. Overnight, we're asking people using communications, technology, and data to change their lives, to save their lives almost overnight. That's what we're up against in this pandemic. So while a really big question, I think it's an important question for all of us on the line today, as we take a step back from our daily lives, our brands and our businesses, and we think about the adaptations we need to deliver, because impact, I'd argue, has never mattered more than it does right now. But this question, a version of it, is a question that Dan Barry and I are involved in almost on a daily basis in our day jobs, pandemic or not. As a health communicator and former advocate, and Dan as a behavioral scientist, we spend our time talking a lot about this question. How do we use technology, creativity to help people make better decisions about health? And we thought it'd be really useful to invite a larger conversation today to help us explore it in light of this pandemic, when, as I said, impact matters more than ever. For those of you who haven't yet met Dan, he is one of the behavioral scientists who set up the UK's nudge unit in the Department of Health before he joined Hill & Knowlton Strategies in London. And as someone who's been in the field of health communications and advocacy for 20 years, Dan, my work sort of has never been more effective since we met, since I've had the benefit of marrying the not so secret ingredient now, which is behavioral science and an understanding of how humans behave to the creativity, technologies, and data that we have available to us as communicators. I thought maybe you'd kick us off, Dan, by helping people understand on the call why an understanding of the way humans behave is just so important right now to the work we're creating.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Yeah, it's so critical, because I guess in a nutshell, real world human behavior can be strange, and especially when we're busy, when we're distracted, when we're stressed, which frankly, all of those things is what most of us are most of the time. A lot of our behavior can seem irrational or weird. And what behavioral science is a better understanding of all those factors. So when we communicate and engage with people, we try and go with the grain of those factors rather than ignore them or fight against them.
I think that's really an important point to kick us off, and the lens through which we're going to be looking at a lot of the challenges that sit behind our bigger question today. So I guess what we're saying is we can't just put up a picture of Dr. Fauci with a sign that says you should trust science and expect that everybody's going to stay home to save their lives because we told them to do so.
Oh, I mean, if only, then everyone would be, fit and healthy, and everyone would get vaccinated and so on. Yeah, that's the core of our discussion. It's the challenge of whether creativity is doing enough for human health. It's unfortunately not always. There's often a gap between people's good intentions. They know what they need to do, but their actions not following through. So just knowing the science, like following Dr. Fauci or the chief medical officer, that's typically not enough to change behavior.
Right. And with all the best will in the world, we can all say I'm hypervigilant, I'm a hand washer, but every once in a while you really have to check yourself against my intention versus what my normal actions are. And as we know, it's often hard to change our habits. And we've been forced to come to terms with that and get smarter about how we do it. So Stefan, if I could have the first slide. The first question I wanted to dive into is, Dan, your team's done some really interesting research that's hyper relevant to this conversation and probably to everyone's business on the phone. You conducted it at the very beginning of the pandemic. I think it was right before lockdown that you did this work, or maybe in the beginning thereof. I would love to hear from your perspective what the science suggests is actually working, because I think there's some learnings that we can all take from your initial piece of research.
Yeah, I think it paints a picture beyond just the coronavirus and the way to get the most effective creative messaging. So yeah, the gist of this is, how do we build this real life human experience into how we engage with people? Go with the grain of warts and all human behavior, even when it can be weird or sometimes even disappointing in human nature. We need to build that in. So I'll show on the next slide is that topical example, although now March feels like about 50 million years ago rather than just 8 or 9 weeks ago. So we looked at the best way to communicate some of the coronavirus messages, and so much of the public health response to coronavirus, until we get a vaccine and until we get some effective therapies, it really is behavior change. And most of that is triggered through good communication. So it's a big moment for behavioral science in healthcare communications. But even when we need to take decisions that can be life or death, for ourselves and for other people, we don't always, act in the Dr. Fauci way. We don't always carefully weigh the pros and cons. So Instead, we need to go beyond the typical, wash your hands because I told you to from, a scientist. That's not enough, and it's never going to be enough. So you might be taking a look at the slides, everyone. You might feel free to comment in the Q&A if you want to have maybe a guess about what's going on in these different variants or which one you think was the most effective. But the gist of what we did was we did some testing, and we shared this with the public health authorities a couple of months ago. See, could we build in these real life factors to enhance how effective the coronavirus messages are? In this case, it was around hand washing. And the insight we found, which actually in this case was really nice, it wasn't disappointing. It was a nice finding as well as an effective finding. And it was that appealing to people's sense of altruism, so doing something to protect other people, particularly, other people you can specifically bring to mind, like vulnerable older people, was much more effective. So the message on the right, the one, protect vulnerable older people by washing your hands, etc., was 10 percentage points more effective than the standard message of getting people to actually take action. So it's that sense of altruism that came through.
I think that's really interesting, and we've seen that evolve over time on the stay home, and the most important message around the UK government stay home scenario was stay home, protect the NHS. They chose an audience that this nation sees as much beloved, who were really under fire in new ways, under assault, as it were, and it proved to be very effective. We can talk about in a bit if it was maybe too effective. But I think what's really interesting here is this idea of altruism. I don't think we've fully explored the potential of altruism in the messaging around the pandemic. And you mentioned earlier, it is Mental Health Awareness Week, and I've been thinking a lot about diversity and inclusion, especially because of the work we do a lot with people who have underlying conditions or rare conditions that they don't necessarily disclose to their colleagues. And as we really build our offices and we bring people back together in the maybe near-term future, I want us to remember that the work that we need to be doing around our messaging, our communications, and our creative throughout this journey, certainly until we have a vaccine, really needs to get people to understand that they need to protect others, even when they may not look old, and they shouldn't have to disclose to us that they have underlying conditions. And I've been, pulling the thread a little further and thinking, some people are going to go through a lot of financial hardships. There's going to be a lot of inequalities that continue to be exposed during the pandemic. And I'm really hoping we see creatives really tapping into the altruism message, the protecting others when you might not know they need protecting, I think is going to be a really important evolution of this kind of finding. And there was another finding you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thanks. This is on the slide actually, so people might have browsed and do chip in with your thoughts on these, everyone, because this one's a bit quirkier. As well as altruism, another finding from that testing we did recently was around making things simple and and evocative and vivid as a way to grab attention. So again, if we accept that people in the real world are busy, distracted, even when they know what they should do, in the moment we may not, and hopefully we can all relate to this. How do we cut through that to actually drive that behavior? And one insight, which led to some of the creatives that you can see where we tested, was to try to grab attention by evoking a sense of yuck. So I'll just pick out one of these, the one in the middle with the eyes. What we wanted to do was to create that sense of by showing that you can catch coronavirus through your eyes, so don't touch your face, which was one of the key public health messages. So another key takeaway for me, which maybe we'll come to this in discussion later. I think some of us in creative industries might find harder to accept actually, because we like to be new and different, is sometimes simple and repetitive is the best. That can be the way to cut through.
Yeah, simple, evocative. I think a lot of us are struggling to respond to the stay alert messaging, because in this case, almost as your poster suggests, the virus isn't something we can see. So the idea of being alert for it feels a little bit harder to understand. And I think you're absolutely right. Creativity doesn't necessarily be new. I've been really hearkening back to this idea of the campaigns that were super effective. Stop, Drop, and Roll for fire prevention in the US was a really important one when I was growing up. Act Fast for stroke. You love Catch It, Bin It, Kill It. We talk a lot about that. These sort of memorable, short, sharp, effective messages. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that and maybe think about, the idea of everything, not necessarily needing to be new to be so effective right now.
That's exactly it. Simple is good. Repetition is good because it's memorable. And we need to have messages that are memorable, and it's actionable advice in the moment. So in the moment, what should I do if I need to sneeze? Catch it, bin it, kill it. It's very simple. So keep things simple.
Love it. Stefan, I think we can dive into our second question of the conversation today, which is something I think that a lot of us, and we're certainly experiencing it right now, this idea of virtual experience. The New York Times the other day said that life was being lived in isolation and mediated through technology. Many of us are seeing technologies improve at really accelerating rates our lives lived in isolation, and I think video conferencing is the obvious example. When we think about this question, how can an understanding of human behavior or behavioral science improve virtual experiences? I think there are a lot of leaders and folks on the call today who are thinking that through right now, how we can improve virtual experiences. And for the purposes of the call and staying true to our expertise, which is in health and wellness, I'd love to look at this question through the lens of e-health, through telemedicine, and how we think we're going to see this technology accelerate and what human behavior understanding can really help us do to improve the experience of e-health as it explodes, which I think it will for all of us in the coming months. Is this the end of the doctor's office?
Well, I mean, firstly, just to reflect, because I used to work in the NHS, the speed at which the NHS in England has gone to online consultations is just amazing. I don't think the NHS is renowned for its, being at the forefront of innovation, but almost overnight, it's, we've gone from almost no consultations being anything but face-to-face to almost all consultations being remote, and that is really encouraging.
You often tell me and remind me that one of the most effective ways to change behavior is to take the choice away. And I think the pandemic in so many aspects of our life has taken the choice away, but there's a lot more, I think, that companies should be keeping in mind as they build these technologies and as we ask so many of us to change our behavior and start to have these virtual experiences with something that we hold as dear as our health. So I'd love to hear your advice on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a general point, I think, which is it's human first, not tech first. And I think sometimes we can get carried away by what is technologically possible. It's not really tailored enough to the human experience. And that includes the diversity point, maybe particularly some of the groups who most need the health and wellbeing support, maybe the ones who least. It's less just about availability of technology, but just it doesn't fit their lifestyle so much. And to unpack that a bit more, I think there are some overlooked real world factors that don't make an easy like for like swap. So for example, at the moment, there's really no choice but to have most consultations online. But if we think to the hopefully not too distant future when maybe there is a choice, you could have the option of going into the clinic to see your doctor or nurse, or you could have a remote consultation. Might people somehow feel the remote option is suboptimal and they're being fobbed off with not the full care that they deserve? And the analogy that comes to mind is theatres. So maybe football as well as an example, but take theatres. We can all watch broadcasts of theatre productions online, and you'd get the best seat in the house, wouldn't you, by watching the filming of it on YouTube from home? But it ain't the same, is it? There's all those other factors that make going to the theatre pleasurable and an occasion. And of course, going to the doctor is different in a million ways, but there are still some of those other factors that actually are important to the patient's overall experience, like the journey to the clinic, engaging with the receptionist. Maybe these are moments that allow patients to, reflect on what they want from the conversation with their clinician and gather their thoughts. And it becomes part of the therapy. It was never deliberate, but it has become through custom and practice and expectation part of what we understand to be good clinical care. Now, there might be some of that we're happy to jettison. Going to a clinic when there's a virus in the community is dangerous. So great, let's jettison things that may not be helpful. But when we design communications with patients around, e-consultations, how could we factor in those other factors that actually are quite valuable to people? And let's not ignore them and then wish they come back again.
I think you're right. There's some positives and there's some opportunities to improve the experience, but I also think we have to really think that through from the patient experience lens. We've done so much work over the past 15, 20 years to really understand patient experience as a valuable contributor to health outcomes. And I don't want to see that lost as we move to a technological experience. And I also think about the educational experience of sitting in the waiting room and all of the various touch points and messaging interventions that we can use to educate a patient who might be there for a diabetes visit can learn about their heart health while they sit and wait. So I think we have to think about the educational opportunities as well. I'm also, as anyone who knows me knows, very much a believer in keeping the human in health. I'm a huge advocate for technology transforming healthcare. I think the outcomes that we're going to see in years to come and through this pandemic are going to be greatly enhanced by technology. That's obvious. But I do think until at which point we are no longer human, you have to remember to keep the human at the center of the way we design the healthcare experience. And one of the aspects that I consider really important is that idea of touch. So we know that bedside manner matters. We know that human touch in medicine is so important, particularly in conditions like breast cancer. We see very rational people switch physicians if they don't have that human element in certain medical conditions. And I would love to think that when Stefan shows the haptic heartbeat, I would love to see other technology companies really looking at the ways we can create these proxies for human touch. You mentioned it, Dan. I think we all feel it's so important. Stefan mentioned it. And Stefan, I think this is a place I'd love to invite you to switch your camera back on and maybe talk to us a little bit about the enhancements that you think e-health and telemedicine will make from a communications perspective.
Thanks, Jess. I must say I'm a little bit less nostalgic about the historical medical experience and behaviors. I mean, I think it's sort of a positively 19th century construct that you have to go and wait in a waiting room after having to call at 1 minute past 8 for an appointment for 3 days out, etc. And I think the right way to think about it though is to take the best of what the human touch and the interpersonal kind of care experience is, and to augment that with technology. And so I think it's not one or the other for me. I mean, clearly at the moment it's sort of we're forced to do a lot of it remotely. But this idea of being able to, for instance, do continuous tracking or continuous assessment of particularly patients with chronic conditions, so where the doctor doesn't just check in once every 6 months or once every year when someone goes to go see their doctor, but can continuously understand how their condition is exacerbating or improving, through biometric data that can be fed to the clinician. I think is a very interesting opportunity for ongoing care, which would enhance what we have today. I also think that, if you think about elderly people, the ability to monitor sound in a home in order to detect falls or distress, is a very important part of care that can also, again, enhance the customer experience. And then I think, this idea of haptics, a lot of us, I think, have had smartwatches since they came out, since the first Nike band came out. A lot of us, adopt them and then just, sort of abandon them. So you sort of have two parts of the spectrum. You have the measured self, the sort of super athletes who monitor everything about their bodies and are sort of, almost approach their own health as a scientific experiment. And then you have people, in critical care or ER that are being monitored, by physicians in a hospital. But in between, you have all these people who are really not, looking, focusing on their own health or monitoring it in any kind of consistent way. Now, again, I think a lot of this getting it right has to do with behavioral science and the nudges and the messaging and so on the devices, on the apps have to, and I think they've improved, but they have to still improve further in order to become, really kind of self-sustaining. Haptic nudges, I find really interesting. Again, back to my new iWatch, the nudge to get up and move, the nudge to breathe. I mean, eventually you get a little bit tired of it, but there's something about a haptic reminder which is more interesting and actually more immediate very often than a piece of content, data, or text that you see on the screen. So, I think all these things together can be used to augment many aspects of health, both personal monitoring, assessment, personal responsibility, but also interaction with physicians.
Thank you so much. For our final question and our next slide, please, I would like to invite Claire into this one.
Sorry. Oh, okay. You're going to invite me in anyway. I was just going to give you guys probably a 5-minute warning before we have to move on to questions.
Fantastic.
So maybe
let's
conclude this and move on to your takeouts.
Do we conclude this now in our takeouts, and then we can roll into questions? That sounds great. So we can go to the next slide, Stefan, and think about what we were hoping we might communicate today, which is really this idea of tapping into your audience's sense of altruism and protecting others rather than asking them to do actions that are in their own self-interest for protection. The second one is, as Dan said very beautifully and Stefan echoed, adapt the technology to fit the human, not the other way around. But it's also not an either or. This is going to be a really beautiful marriage that I think we're going to continue to build over time and really see outcomes wildly improve. So I think let's look at it as a balance and keep the human at the center of the design and do that in a really inclusive way. And then I think our third one is a really interesting concept that's probably best left for another day and a further conversation, but audiences really seek certainty, and we're asking them to evaluate risk right now in ways that most people are completely unprepared to do. So how can we use creativity to really help our audiences better evaluate risk and benefit? It's at the basis of so many of the decisions we make about our health, and I think now more than ever, we need to build this into mainstream programming, and I would love to see creatives answer that call.
Yep, and then the final key takeaways, it's designing for inclusion, just as we were saying, there are lots of ways to bring in really, let's aim for the hard to reach groups and work back from there. And I think we're all agreeing that's a big challenge, but it's something where we need to aim for. And then finally, and maybe this takes us nicely into questions, Claire, actually, is around, meaning in the world and purpose matters more than ever. And there are some ways that we have some thoughts on how brands might be able to cut through differently, but perhaps that takes us to questions.
Yeah, well, and thank you for those takeaways. I guess actually we kind of moved on quite quickly from your third question. And if you did have anything else that you wanted to kind of reflect on for your third question before we do go into other people's questions, was there anything else worth?
Why don't I just remind everyone what the question was, which is, I think the scale of this pandemic can be quite daunting to people. And a lot of us are looking at the ways our businesses need to reflect on our purpose and what we stand for. I think the needs of our audiences have changed quite significantly. And while we need to stay true to who we are as a brand or a business, we also need to consider that. We need to think about the way our audiences interact with us if we want to deepen our relationships. And so we were asking this question of what does creativity need to do to scale? Does it need to really ramp up? And I think my personal point of view, and I'd love to open it up to the floor and to Claire, Stefan, what do you think about this? I'm a big believer in what Dan just mentioned, this idea of simplification right now. I think we need to look at what the needs of the planet, of our audiences, of the pandemic truly are. And I think we need to pick where we can be most useful. I think we're going to be measured on the usefulness that we can create for our audiences over time. And that's going to help us build trust and strong relationships with our audiences. And that's my view. And I was curious as to what yours were.
It was interesting, Jess. As soon as you kind of posed that question, my mind went to Adidas, which is one of the clients that I spend the most amount of time on. And Adidas is always driven by its core belief of the power of sport to change lives. and it exists to help and inspire all athletes. And when, I guess, COVID hit, it kind of pivoted all its communications and then launched its home team campaign, which was about helping and supporting everyone at home stay healthy, both physically and mentally, and using all its kind of sponsored athletes and brand ambassadors to shoot content from home to inspire its communities. It's probably some of Adidas's quickest, most simplest, lo-fi communication the brand's done, but the engagement around it has been so huge. And it's really been an example of how the brand can live its purpose at scale, and arguably when it's needed the most.
Lovely.
Great. So I guess what might be nice is if anyone else has examples of how companies have creatively lived their purpose during this period. We'd love to hear any examples that you have and feel confident to kind of share with the group. So do put that on the Q&A, and we'll try. There's a Q&A icon on the right-hand side of your screen. So do kind of log any reflections on this question there. And we'll also kind of bridge into broader Q&A at this time. And these are going to be obviously questions to kind of all our speakers. We have got 10 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. I think whilst everyone's probably thinking about their questions, I'm going to pose the first one. And this is to potentially all of you, if we can go through it quite quickly. What campaign or communication have you seen during this period that has surprised you the most? So maybe Stefan, do you want to take that question first? Have I put you? I'll go to Jess first.
I can go.
Good idea.
I'll give you 2 minutes to think about it, and I'll speak very slowly. I think the answer, again, for my colleagues may surprise you. The example I'm going to pick, if you eat lunch with me on a given day, it won't surprise you at all. But the example that most surprised me, and it tickled me to the core, because it's actually quite insightful, is Noma, the restaurant in Copenhagen, which is been named the best restaurant in the world many years in a row. It's run by a creative innovator called Rene Redzepi, who, as many of you probably know, is considered one of the most innovative thinkers in the world. And he runs this restaurant where you can go and dine on wood ants and have these conceptual experiences and live prawns and all of these things. And it's a journey, it's an experience, it's truly innovative. And what he's doing now, as Denmark is opening up, is he's opening Noma as a burger and beer joint. And I think while that might sound, oh, why is Des talking about a burger and beer joint? I'm talking about it because the insight that shows is that what he's responding to is the greatest needs of his audience right now is to heal. And so he's, offering up this space and simple food over which to heal. And I just think that shows a complete ability to step back as a brand and to truly think about how you can be most useful in a way that's relevant to your business, but can really respond to the current need, and allow yourself the room for future adaptation, but to recognize that in the moment, we need to adapt to heal. I think it's beautiful.
Great example. Making us all hungry. Thanks, Jess.
I really want to go to a restaurant.
Dan, do you have something that has surprised you?
Yeah, I've got a very quick one then, because Jess already referred to the government's messages. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, and then we've moved to stay alert. I won't get into stay alert, but what surprised me is that the first message, stay at home, protect the NHS, was, if anything, too successful. Too many people stayed at home, crashed the economy, the strategy had to change. And then protect the NHS in particular. The NHS has never been under less demand than it has been now. That's been heard too strongly. Lots of people with non-COVID conditions stopped going to the doctor at all. So for me as a behavioural scientist, it was, I designed behaviour change campaigns, but here we found one that was too effective, and that doesn't happen very often.
Great. Thanks, guys. I'm going to take one of the questions that's come into the Q&A chat. So you've talked about how the UK government has done well. What can we learn from other countries and how they've managed their communications? Jess, do you want to take that one?
I sure can. And you may expect me to answer this with a certain government in mind, but I'm going to...
Pick up on your accent. We'll avoid that one for now.
I'm going to call out the incredible response we've seen in New Zealand. The Prime Minister of New Zealand has been celebrated for her transparency and the ability to lead in a human and authentic way. And I think the data are showing that authentic leaders right now, ones who know when to admit they don't have all of the answers. I was watching some of the scientific commentary this week, and the scientists are the first to tell us that we are on a journey with this. And I appreciate that as a leader and as a government, that's a very nuanced position to be in, to be learning as you go. But I think disclosing that, acting human and leading by example, showing what you are doing to change your life, talking about why we've pulled together the experts that we have. I think being authentic, being transparent, being, cognizant of your advisors, and I think being multidisciplinary right now are the elements that are going to make for successful leadership. And I think the leaders who have that strategy in mind are the ones who are going to be judged as most successful.
Thanks, Jess. Stefan, I have a question for you. Can we have too much tech?
Well,
I think you're biased.
Asking the turkeys to vote for Christmas. No, I mean, look, I'm a technologist, but I'm a skeptical technologist, and I think this idea of human-centered design, when you think about technology, is absolutely at the heart of what we do across WPP. I mean, technology, whether it's the wheel or whether it's fire or or whether it's smartphones. I mean, these are just tools to help us live more efficient lives, or kind of more comfortable lives. And I think technology is at the heart of all ideas around innovation. So I don't think one can ever have too much technology, but the point is not to focus on it for its own sake. And I think this is where frankly, a lot of companies go, make mistakes in terms of their technology investments, that they focus on thinking that if they have the technology and the systems and the software, that their business processes and capabilities and the way they engage with consumers will change, and it doesn't. So, I think it's customer first in everything, and customer experience, human-centered design first is the way to focus on it. But I think it's impossible today to operate in any form of customer engagement. You can't master technology, whether it's how to communicate, how to understand content, how to transact, how to create connected experiences across, products, environments and digital platforms.
I have now a question for Dan. What's your behavioural science top tip for how we can help our own friends and families to keep following lockdown guidelines and not slip?
Oh, I was worried until I heard the end of your question, because often I'm asked things, how can I get my husband or wife to do the washing up and things like that? And if I knew that, I'd be a millionaire. So, yeah, I think this comes back to one of our key insights, not just from our own testing, but from other campaigns, which is that in this case, it's tapping into that sense of altruism. So I'm sure at some point over the past weeks or the coming weeks, we've wanted to go and meet our friends, get a haircut, or a few of us are desperate for, and just get back to real life. And it's hard, it's really hard not to. But the key thing to remind ourselves is we're doing this to protect other people, vulnerable older people. They're still at risk, and that's the thing to come back to again and again and again.
Right, I think we might have time for one more question. So potentially you might all have time to answer this, so get thinking. Since COVID has really proven that the planet is connected, how do we avoid bad information and worse practice from other countries? Quite a big question there. Jess, do you want to kind of kick off?
I mean, my first response to that is, I mean, I don't really know what the question is asking other than, I mean, how do we avoid worst practice from other countries? I think country to country comparisons in COVID are really, can be problematic is my first response to that. I think we need to be following our own government's guidance. I think we need to look at the scientists, the international scientists even, but I think we really need to follow the message of the environment that we're operating in, because the nature of this disease is that it's been controlled and is spreading in different ways based on the environment that you're in. So it's so important that you do follow the guidance. And I think we're going to see that become even more regional in countries like the UK and probably elsewhere as well. But I think country to country comparisons can be interesting, and I understand why people do them. But I think it's really important to think about the environments that we're living in, and staying as local as we can whilst learning from the international scientific community.
Dan, I guess, is there anything that you've seen that has given you any flags from a behavioural science perspective from other countries? Any communication?
If I might swerve that a little bit, because I've one reflection from the middle part of our conversation, which was around those e-health consultations, so communications between patients and their doctors or nurses. And what triggered this was Stefan's cat. So what I felt then, seeing Stefan's cat or hearing Stefan's cat, and also just looking into each other's houses right now, is it helps make people seem more human. And some clinical conversations, although they're also true in the workplace, can feel quite hierarchical. So actually, one of the things I like is working like this can break down some of those hierarchies. So even very senior, eminent people seem human when their cats want to get out of the room, or when a doctor has got a kid playing in the background. So that was my final reflection.
That's a good one. We knew the cat was there for a reason. Were you prodding him at the beginning to make sure he did his part well?
Exceptional mistiming. I was trying to avoid it.
There's always going to be something. Well, thank you so much, guys. I think we're going to kind of wrap up now. So thank you so much for sharing your views and your points today. A really thought-provoking discussion. And thank you to everyone that's joined us to listen to the conversation today. And I hope that it's given some inspiration that you can kind of take back into your desks and into your work. We are going to be sharing a summary of the conversations that have been discussed today, so you'll all receive that. But if there's anything specific that's come up today that you'd like to kind of talk to us about, or if you want to kind of get in touch with the guys here, please do feel free to reach out. And on that final note, we'll say goodbye and really have a lovely evening and a nice bank holiday weekend. Thank you.